Speaker now?
Not normally, but when I'm watching, never when I'm looking at it. Sometimes when I'm judging the side, I would always want people to use this, or it's easier to use it. So.
I developed a whole shorthand strategy in my head because I just had to get a lot faster. So I got these charts of like shorthand symbols. I got this cool one for death. Use it.
That's for what?
Death.
Oh, okay.
Die.
Gotcha. Okay, makes
Murdering,
sense. Yeah.
anything that's death related. And I'll just add an ing to it or something if it's something actually.
Ready to go?
Yeah, I think we're ready. Let's get the party started. You guys all know me, right? Like you, yeah. Run anything, give good words, like, but the back way, give me good impact calculus, you know, what else should I say? Oh, here's a little pet peeve of mine. Yes, let me tell you this. It's good for you to know. I've had to chastise. I'm writing essays this whole term. Yeah, you're going to get me. You're going to get essays. Same with you. I haven't had you guys yet, but yeah, anyways, one of the big criticisms I've had, overall I've been really impressed with what I've seen at Washington. Theory-wise, great. But some of the 4-point refutation that I've seen, or a lot of it, even among the more experienced debaters here, has not been good, particularly in the rebuttals. And sometimes they're giving me voting issues where they're asking me to extend drops, but they're not telling me where. So where is the big word I have for all of you, is tell me where you are on the flow. Tell me where it is that you want me to extend. Don't just tell me what the argument is, but where it was said. Because I keep being put on these like long scavenger hunts. They're like, yeah, somewhere out there in the universe of the flow, I made some argument that I wanted to now extend, you know? That's what I hear. Because you're not telling me where it's at. You're just getting my secret answer.
Do you have a preference on talking speed in the round?
I don't. I did tell, I was asked that earlier, and I said, you know, the one thing I would say is that I understand the league as a whole is very anti-speed. And so while it makes sense to adapt to the judge that you have, I will be a line-by-line judge, but I appreciate good communication, and I appreciate good depth to your arguments. So if by speed, I don't know what you guys would consider really fast, but, you know, I would just say maybe a bit faster than what you normally can do is probably okay with me. I'll at least give you that. That's fair enough. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, there you go. I just, one thing I would say too is what I tell my students, what we've done with Brandon Manoa is every time they've had a comment that says slow down, they've had to do push-ups. So you would think they'd be really ripped right now. I don't know if they've always followed through with that, but they did get better. They got better. So hopefully I can give you good feedback that will help you guys for my talk. Like, I hope you don't look at this round as like, this is the round, we got to win Griff's ballot. Like, yeah, I mean, I guess that's good, but, really what you want from me is maybe weaknesses I see in your strategy or in your theme that you can fix before I talk. So I hope that's ultimately your goal, not just to try to see, because speaking fast won't help you at that talk, right? You're not probably going to get the answer to that. It could happen, but I don't think so. Does that make sense? So I would say take advantage of this round for my talk as much as you can. So use it at your own risk. I'm also open to arguments that says they're going too fast, so I can blow it. So just don't count that position. So if you don't think that argument too well, I'll listen to it. So give me points. Make sense? Okay.
Hi, Joseph Munson Trawczynski.
Trawczynski, second, I get.
Sarah, is that what it is?
Can I pronounce it first?
I'm Roman Smith, second from.
Is that what R?
Exchange with the P.
Okay. That's what I thought. Excellent.
Good.
smoke is seen somewhere in America, the video says, they will not be able to stop our journey toward the final victory, as reported by Reuters on February 5th of this year. This alarming video is not a movie or a video game. In fact, earlier this year, it was released by the North Korean government. We are facing a very real threat from this country, but are currently unprepared to prevent the devastating damage done by a nuclear weapon. It is for this reason that my partner and I stand resolved that the United States federal government should substantially reform its foreign military presence and/or foreign military commitments. Now let's start by looking in depth at one of the biggest threats that we face today, which is the threat of a nuclear North Korea. Our one is nuclear North Korea. North Korea is working toward nuclear weapons that it will be able to fire across the globe. The coming capability was confirmed by Time in February of this year, quote, North Korea conducted its third test of a nuclear device. This test follows North Korea's successful December satellite launch, which demonstrated improved long-range missile technology. North Korea's test is a reminder that it remains the greatest regional security threat, with its weapons capability apparently growing, unquote. North Korea is already testing nuclear missiles, and most experts agree that they will obtain one by about 2016. This timeline was established by the New York Times, quoting Defense Secretary Gates in January of 2011. Said, quote, Defense Secretary Robert Gates warned that North Korea was within 5 years of being able to strike the United States with an intercontinental ballistic missile, and that the country is, quote, becoming a direct threat to the United States, unquote. This timeline was confirmed earlier this month, in fact, by Lauren Thompson, PhD, when he said, quote, Robert Gates predicted that when he was Defense Secretary, that North Korea would be able to launch nuclear attacks against the U.S. soil within 5 years, and leaders in Pyongyang are working hard to make that prediction come true, unquote. North Korea is going to make the 2016 timeline a reality, thus obtaining a nuclear weapon. We'll see why this is so dangerous in our impact, that of the United States at risk. The impact is the United States at risk. North Korea has shown its intention to preemptively use nuclear weapons against the United States, and this was confirmed by an official statement from North Korea's foreign ministry spokesman last month when he said, quote, North Korea will exercise the right to a preemptive nuclear attack to destroy the strongholds of the aggressors and to defend the supreme interests of the country, unquote. While building nuclear weapons, North Korea is making its plans to strike the United States clear. This is a direct threat to our country, and it must be addressed. But before we move into our plan, let's talk about the idea of missile defense. Missile defense refers to the attempt to intercept a nuclear missile during its flight so that the missile never reaches its target. Now we'll examine two possible kinds of missile defense that could be used against the North Korean threat. We'll start with the one that our government is currently pursuing, with option one, that of mid-course defense. Mid-course defense. Now when a missile is launched from another country, it travels through the sky, out of the atmosphere, and then back down to Earth to explode. The stage in which the missile is in space is referred to as mid-course. Our current missile defense attempts to intercept nuclear missiles in this stage of the process. Unfortunately, while in space, nuclear missiles can easily deploy decoys, something even so simple as a balloon on the end of a warhead, and our missile defense is not prepared to deal with these. This was confirmed by Yusuf Boot, PhD, in May of 2012. Quote, the latest tests of the missile defense system have failed. These are rigged tests where the intercept team knows the timing and the trajectory of the incoming missile, and the missile has no decoys. There are no such luxuries in the real world. On the very few occasions that they have tested countermeasures, even these carefully rigged tests have never succeeded, unquote. According to this expert, our mid-course missile defense fails even when given unrealistically easy tests. However, and thankfully, there is another kind of missile defense, which we'll examine in option 2, that of boost phase defense. Boost phase defense. Now, before a nuclear missile leaves the atmosphere, it must be launched from a site on Earth. After it is launched, it experiences what is called the boost phase, when the missile is starting to build the speed and the momentum required for its journey. During this stage of a missile's flight, it's moving much slower and cannot deploy countermeasures. A missile defense system to take advantage of the weaknesses of the boost phase was detailed by Theodore Postel, PhD in nuclear engineering, in March of 2009. He said that, quote, there is a missile defense that would shoot down long-range missiles as they slowly accelerate from their launching sites. The defense would have fast accelerating interceptors that would be carried by stealthy unmanned airborne vehicles that already exist. This defense would be technologically feasible, could be developed, built, and deployed in a relatively short time, and would be effective almost immediately on deployment, unquote. The experts agree that a boost phase system is much more feasible for actually intercepting the enemy missiles. Let's keep this knowledge on missile defense in mind plan to defend our nation. Our mandate is that of drone missile defense. Drone missile defense. The United States will deploy a boost phase stealth drone-based missile defense system to defend against North Korea. These drones are small unmanned aircraft that carry small interceptor missiles that destroy the attacking missiles. The standard known best available technology will be used. Drones will be deployed outside North Korea's airspace to cover the country's ICBM launch sites. The Department of Defense will determine the best locations to station the drones, as well as any other relevant classified details. Possible locations, though, include the Sea of Japan or the Korean Bay and others. Any required refueling or maintenance will be done by normal means. Agency enforcement comes from the President, the military, and any other necessary government agencies. This plan will cost a maximum of about $10 billion over 20 years, or that's an average of $500 million per year. This funding comes from the current defense budget. Let's keep in mind the fact that boost phase missile defense is the only effective way to protect the United States. We'll examine the benefits of our plan through our advantage, that is security preserved. Security preserved. According to George Lewis, a PhD in experimental physics, and Theodore Postal, PhD in nuclear engineering, they said in November 2010 that, quote, it would be possible while patrolling outside the borders of North Korea to shoot down an ICBM with its nuclear warhead at existing launch sites anywhere in the country. Operating such a defense would be easy. Stealthy drones could shoot down North Korean long-range ballistic missiles in the boost phase, unquote. Missile defense does not have to be an unsure, risky business. In fact, as these experts note, defending ourselves from nuclear missiles can be easy. All of this leads to the impact that of global safety. The impact is global safety. This system would stop North Korea from successfully launching a nuclear missile, protecting not only us, but our allies as well. According to Patrick M. Cronin, PhD et al., April 2012, they said that, quote, adding serious boost phase intercept capabilities can make the difference between advancing a dangerous North Korean capability and offering a stern lesson to Pyongyang about the resolve of the United States and its allies, unquote. If you vote for this proposal, you're voting to disarm our enemies and to strengthen our allies. Inaction is a vote for an unprotected United States with an enemy that is working towards a devastating weapon that they fully intend to use against us. We ask you to strengthen our great nation. Thank you very much.
Hi, how are you doing today, Megan?
Pretty good, how about you, sir?
I'm doing well. So a couple quick questions. First off, have a copy of what I see?
Yeah, no problem. And all of the full cards and citations are in the back.
Awesome, thank you so much. So the next question is, what makes you think that North Korea would strike the U.S. currently?
Not only the threats that they've been making and the guarantee to preemptively strike the United States, but that they've also been backing up those words with their actions. Recent tests of their nuclear missile systems and the timeline that we have, they'll have an ICBM by about 2016.
Would you agree that they've been threatening war for the last several years, as long as already testing their ICBM program?
While they may have had minor threats in the past, they have never made official statements saying that they will preemptively strike the United States, and they've never had the capabilities that they are gaining now.
Okay, so when will they have that capability?
About 2016 to reach the United States.
Okay, interesting. Now, so your is it your stance that they can't strike until 2016?
That's, well, roughly 2016, yes.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Well, let's talk a little bit about your plan. Now, the basic premise of your plan is you use phase in North Korea. Now, where do you specifically place the drones?
Yeah, we're leaving that flexibility up to the DoD for the bases. What would happen is that once an ICBM is actually detected, then the drones would patrol outside the borders of North Korea. So they're not always patrolling, they will probably be in bases most of the time, but when we do have that...
You don't know where the bases are located?
The bases would be strictly confidential. If that was released, then that would not be a good thing. But we leave that flexibility to the DoD.
Okay.
And the possible locations were like the Sea of Japan, the Korean Bay, or one of our bases in those countries.
Okay, great. So it's not over North Korean airspace?
Correct.
Okay, interesting. Let's talk a little bit about interceptors. Sure. Now, how many sizes are there available for interceptors currently?
I don't know all of the sizes.
Would you agree that there's 2 interceptors that currently can be put on a drone?
There's a couple different kinds that could be fit on a drone, yes.
Do you know,
and that's all current technology.
Do you know which one you're putting on a drone? Do you know any model names, or is that all up to the team?
No, again, this is a rapidly evolving technology, so we leave that like Congress does in the real world, we leave that flexibility up to the DoD.
Okay, great. Now let's talk a little bit about your sovereignty specifically. Sure. Talk about how boost phase is not susceptible to countermeasures, correct?
Correct.
What's the warrant for that? Why is boost phase not susceptible?
Yeah, because actually in the boost phase, in the first couple of minutes I believe that there is, they actually don't have time to deploy those countermeasures, so it's simply not plausible for them to have countermeasures.
Now, do decoys usually counter, do they target radars or do they target the actual interceptors?
If you're referring, are you referring to jammers or like countermeasures on the
Jammers.
Jammers can work in certain circumstances if the drone is very close.
Are they against the radar or against the interceptor?
I'm not aware of which one.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about the NRC report.
Sure.
Now, would you agree that the NRC report specifically gives the exception that your drone will only work if it's put over North Korea's airspace?
Yeah, actually that's an interesting question if I could answer that in the next bit of cross-ex. But what actually happens is that the NRC makes that exception for instance, if North Korea were to shoot off an ICBM, then we would be able to fly in at that point to shoot it down if we had to, because at that point North Korea's basically already declared war on us.
Okay, interesting. We're out of time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Did you want your timer?
You guys want to use your...
Yeah.
Use 30 seconds.
Really presented us with a false choice in this video, a choice between no defense and defense, or as they put it, basically a guarantee of being destroyed, or at least part of our country being destroyed, and a guarantee of safety. This choice is not true, and I'm here to show you that in the first major speech. We're going to be seeing this through inherency, solvency, and disadvantages. Starting with inherency, mid-course defense. Mid-course defense. Now I know in their first speech they brought up, basically tried to spike this argument out by arguing that mid-course doesn't work. However, we can pull this right across from that option that mid-course doesn't work. I have 3 subpoints to this argument. Subpoint A is the only issue is decoys. The only issue is decoys. Now, the only issue with mid-course that they brought up in their first speech was the fact that they're susceptible to decoys. And basically, that's the only issue. Subpoint B is that X-band radar solves. X-band radar solves. X-band radars are a very new, powerful, early warning type radar system that's being deployed currently in East Asia along with our missile defense, our GMP systems there, basically making them effective. According to the National Academy of Sciences in December 2012, but in summary, it's concluded that by observation over the longest possible time that X-band radar is a prerequisite for mid-course discrimination. The failure to exploit fully the ability to extend the synergy between 2 sensor classes, which permits extending the range of X-band radar tracking and discrimination, has unnecessarily compromised the performance of the PNC system. Unquote. Basically, what it's saying is that X-band radar is very important. It's critical to the performance of our BMD systems. According to the Wall Street Journal in August 2012, basically we're putting up a lot of X-band radar along with our new missile defense in Japan. It says, quote, a centerpiece of the new effort would be the deployment of a powerful early warning radar known as X-band on an undisclosed southern Japanese island, said U.S. defense officials. Unquote. Now let me explain why X-band is important. It's the most powerful type of early warning radar that we have. And given it's so effective, what it can do is effectively determine which missiles are countermeasures and which missiles are the real thing. With this type of powerful early warning radar, as the evidence said, we can make BMD or GMD legitimate. Moving on to my first solvency point. Solvency 1, threat is too imminent. Threat is too imminent. And this is going to be a big point throughout this debate. I'm going to look at their 1AC, take some direct quotes, and really show you how their own arguments really just turn against them in the end. Now, their evidence they read in the 1AC that says North Korea, their evidence says, quote, North Korea will exercise the right to a preemptive nuclear attack to destroy the strongholds of the aggressors and defend the supreme interests of its country, unquote. Basically, the affirmative teams are agreeing that North Korea will launch a nuclear weapon very soon. A couple more warrants to back this up. It's just a couple of days ago, North Korea actually pointed a few nuclear missiles basically right at South Korea and Japan. The problem is that North Korea is currently doing this in the current system. The threat is very imminent. North Korea really could strike at any moment in time. Now, here's the problem. The affirmative team's plan, as their own mandate admits, takes several years to deploy. Now, first of all, I'd like to point out that they don't even know what type of technology they're using. First of all, they have to decide what drone they're using, and the government also has to decide what interceptor they're using. Then, the time it will take to combine these two technologies will probably extend the timeline even longer. However, it's already going to be at least a year, probably 2 years, or even more. What this means is that the deployment of the plan, the timeline of that is way out in the future. While the North Korean threat is imminent, it'll probably come to a standoff within the next couple of months, if not in this current month. But that means that in the next couple of months, North Korea will use their right to, not their right, but North Korea will do a nuclear strike on South Korea or Japan, meaning that the United States and our allies will retaliate against them. North Korea is done, their nuclear program is over with, and there's no need for the drone missile defense system. It's too late to be deployed. Solvency 2 is that of jammers. Jammers. Even if we got the missile defense up before North Korea's nuclear program was destroyed, it wouldn't work anyway because of something called jammers. Basically, the ability of North Korea to jam the transmitters or whatever on our drones make them ineffective. According to George Lewis and Theodore Postal, they were quoted by the affirmative team in 2008, quote, jammers produce an interfering noise signal roughly equal to the reflected signals from a warhead, making it impossible for a radar to determine whether or not a warhead is present. The jammer could easily generate tens of thousands of false targets to mask the presence or location of the warhead. Each jammer could be inches on a side, weigh fractions of a pound, and consist of commercially available circuitry and power supplies, unquote. Basically, North Korea can easily obtain these jammers that would render any missile defense, that's any missile defense, ineffective. Let's move on to the disadvantages now. But actually, before we get to the disadvantages, let's just go over the disadvantages. I'll let my partner respond to their case in the next speech. My first disadvantage is loss of control. Loss of control. The link to this disadvantage is basically boost phase missile defense. The difference between boost phase missile defense and mid-course is that in mid-course we have more time to determine where the missile is and basically more time before we shoot it down after the launch. Boost phase, you have to take it out pretty much directly after the launch. The internal link is that the decision would be made by computers and low-level CEOs. National Academy of Sciences, summer 2012. But the short time for intercept raises an important question in security. To allow boost phase interceptors to be fired within a few tens of seconds of detection of the launch of the attacking missiles, authority to engage would have to be delegated to the military personnel with immediate control of the system. In practice, the decision to intercept would need to be made largely by a computer program, with human input essentially non-existent. Accordingly, civilian and high-level military authority would have to be exercised by determining the rules of engagement that were allowed in the computer program rather than in real time during the actual attack, unquote. What this means is that if you go for their plan and turn our main defense into the boost phase missile defense, basically what this means is that the decisions to basically when to strike and where to shoot the interceptors at these missiles will be made by computers, and really there's always a possibility for something like a virus or a malfunction in the software. If that's only off by a little bit, the intercept will not work and the missile will go through. This is a huge problem for a couple of reasons. First of all, it decreases our security. Impact 1 decreases our security because we will have actually less ability to effectively take out the missile. Impact 2 is loss of life. Loss of life. You can basically cross-apply their advantage impacts on this one, but this disadvantage is still outweighs their advantage because of the fact that it decreases our security, because of the fact that the launch decision on the interceptors will be made by computers and not actual jammers. Disadvantage 2 is Chinese relations. Chinese relations. We're going to spend the rest of my speech on this point. The unique point is that relations are set to improve. Basically, China got a little bit mad when we put in our mid-course defenses. However, basically not too mad. And we're going to be talking about why that will make China very mad and why the boost phase will make them more mad. But relations are set to improve with the new Chinese president and the new Secretary of State. They've gotten off to a good start, and U.S.-Chinese cooperation for the future are looking pretty good. The latest that planning is China. China dislikes U.S. missile defense. Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, May 2001. Quote, many Chinese commentators found in aspects to be especially troubling the importance ascribed by the U.S. to missile defense. Chinese academic and military officers view missile defense as a means for degrading China's deterrent and as a threat to strategic stability. Some describe this as a trap that would require Beijing to engage in expensive and potentially ruinous conventional arms races with the U.S. that would harm China's image and prospects for continued rapid economic growth. Unquote. The reason this is actually unique to the affirmative team's plan is because the current missile defense system is one in which we've used before in other areas, and it hadn't had big security detriments to the countries where we put it in before. Drones are a new technology that have not been used. Putting that right in the Sea of Japan, right next to China, presents a unique disadvantage and really decreasing Chinese relations. The second internal link is tensions. Obviously, this increases tensions between the U.S. and China. Internally, it creates that tensions could lead to conflict. According to Zbigniew former U.S. National Security Advisor, February 2012, quote, the U.S. must recognize that stability in Asia can no longer be imposed by a non-Asian power. And propelling Washington into a direct application of U.S. power could propel Washington to cost a repeat of its recent wars, potentially even resulting in a replay of tragic events of Europe of the 20th century. Basically, there's an increased risk of conflict with China. I'll try to flesh this out more with the impacts in my next speech, but for all these reasons, we'd ask you to vote for the negative team. Thanks a ton.
All right. Everybody? Yep. All right, how are you doing today, Joe?
Pretty good, maybe have a
Great. So just a couple questions, as you probably guessed. First of all, can I see the evidence of the excavator right now, please?
yes, you can.
Thank you. All right, and can I pass that back? All right. Now, you talked about how the threat is actually much more imminent than 2016. Did you talk about the 2016 ICBM threat, or did you refer to the short range, medium range that they're developing right now?
I was referring to short range because if they nuke South Korea, the U.S. as a defense group in South Korea would retaliate, the nuclear program would be gone, and there would be a problem.
Okay, thank you. Now, you also brought up the solvency of jammers. Can I see the piece of evidence, please?
Sure.
Thank you. I'll just look that back with you. All right, now let's move down to your two disadvantages. First of all, you said that we would lose control. Now, what boost phase did your evidence actually talk about? Which boost phase system?
Any boost phase system.
The NAC report.
NAS, actually.
NAS, sorry.
So basically what it's talking about is any boost phase system, since basically boost phase where you take it out right after launch, there's a really short time window where that has to take place, so there's not time to let the high-ups know who should go and
Okay, and did that take into account where the boost phase would be placed?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, did it talk about airborne or did it talk about land-based?
This was talking about airborne. We can bring up more context to this article, but the NAS is talking about airborne. I think based on what I see in Japan, actually, we actually more evidence about this.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's move down to your second disadvantage of Chinese relations. Actually, this was a really interesting disadvantage. Now, was it actually referring to boost phase missile defense?
Actually, specifically, yes. First of all, missile defense in general, but boost phase is a new technology which will make China even more afraid than they would be.
Would you agree with me that Russia and China had issues with the European missile defense system, for instance?
I know Russia did, and that's actually still a problem between the United States and Russia, and this hindered cooperation. Has almost led to war, for instance, 2008 when they invaded Georgia.
Thank you. Now, would you agree with me, though, that the main difference between boost phase and the traditional missile defense system, like the mid-course, is that boost phase defends everyone from one country versus defending one country from everyone else?
Can you rephrase the question? I don't think I got it.
Sure. Boost phase, you would agree with me, protects everyone from one country specifically, correct?
No, that's not necessarily true. Because of the drones we're putting there, China doesn't know what the actual capabilities
but
of the drones.
If we're based around North Korea, and if that is the goal of the missile defense system, if it can only shoot down ICBMs from North Korea, would you agree that that's defending everyone from North Korea?
If the United States puts drones with new technology, with offensive capabilities, with equipped with interceptors right next to China, or Japan, that's going to cause China to be upset.
Thank you. But your evidence was also talking about how that would possibly affect China's deterrent. Is that correct? That they were worried the missile defense would come. Okay, can I see that piece of evidence real quick? Thank you. And then we're out of time for questions. Thank you very much.
myself as well to help keep it. All right, if you're ready, and time. Name a few. And maybe. Well, in the words of Herman Cain, the problem with your analysis that is incorrect. And that's what we're going to be looking at in this speech, is looking through the negatives, arguments, and we have a lot to cover, so let's go right into it. We're going to start with the argument of mid-course defense and whether or not X-band radar really solves the issue. So I have three responses here. My first response is not ready for ICBMs. Now I'm going to look at a quote from the Office of the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation. This is an annual direct report to the Secretary and Deputy Secretary of Defense, basically done by the government on how our technology works. So this is the 2012 one, so the most recent one. This said, quote, the Missile Defense Agency has not gathered adequate sea-based X-band radar performance data against intercontinental ballistic missile threats and targets to enable accreditation of the radar models. And quote, essentially what this is saying is that according to the government itself, the X-band radar is not ready to deal with ICBMs. The Missile Defense Agency has not acquired enough data on that yet. My second response is wires defeated. Wires defeated. The fact is that the X-band radar can actually be deflected by simple wires. This is confirmed by Kimberly Misher, research assistant in the Non-Proliferation Program of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in 2009, when she said, quote, a number of countermeasures can be deployed to frustrate missile defense's targeting and discrimination functions. Small wires placed on the warhead nose create chaff and reflect the X-band energy needed for detection. The know-how and technological base required for such offensive countermeasures coincides with the progress required to develop long-range ballistic missiles. And essentially what that's saying is that they can create, that countries, once they can create an ICBM, they'll have the technology to put these simple wires on the end of the warhead that obscure it and reflect the X-band energy, which means the X-band radar doesn't work. My third response is a simple code. This is from George Lewis, PhD, and Theodore Postal, PhD, in May of 2010, saying, quote, one way an adversary can make it impossible for the radar to measure the length of a warhead is to simply cover the warhead's rounded nose with a thin metal cone-shaped sleeve that has a pointy nose. This simple measure would deny the X-band radar the ability to measure the length of the warhead, or even in many situations the ability to detect it at all. End quote. This is from two professors in physics looking at how the radar specifically works, the X-band, showing that a simple thin metal cone could stop that from working. Clearly this radar is not the solution to all the problems with mid-course defense. Now let's go on to the argument about jammers. Now, actually, we're going to go to the time first. I'm doing it out of order. Now, for the time argument, I've floated across from the harm of nuclear North Korea, solvency of threat too imminent. That's basically what I'm responding to now. Now, basically what they said was that North Korea, the threat is too imminent, it's too soon for us to do anything about it. So let's just look through the timeline really quick. The time that North Korea will have a nuclear weapon, the timeline specifically not contested by the negative team, was about 2015-2016. So let's look at how long our plan takes to come into place. Aviation Week in Space Technology, quoting Len Cavaney, who's a PhD in mechanical engineering, talking about our plans, said in September 2010, quote, I think we could build a defense against North Korea in 18 months, end quote, talking specifically about our plan. So there you have it, the timeline there, 18 months. If we enact that now, there's more than enough time there because there's more than 1.5 years between now and 2016. That's just simple math. So now that we have that out of the way, basically the timeline isn't too imminent. Our plan will come in time. Now let's look at the argument about jammers. Now, unfortunately, the negative team didn't actually quote the whole article. First, so let's look at a few responses. My first response is mid-course. Now, the article quoted by the negative team is called the European Missile Defense Folly. It's talking about the mid-course system that we're putting into Europe. That's important to keep in mind. It's not specific to our plan, especially given it's written by the advocates of our plan. But my second response is that basically the interceptor has to discriminate in that case. Let's look at the full quote. After the part that the negative team quoted, it said, quote, the interceptor must be able to select the right target by conducting its own discrimination. The kill vehicle attempts to do this by examining the brightness and fluctuating brightness of the many points of light in front of it. Essentially what that's saying is that if there's a jammer, then the interceptor needs to examine the brightness before and either to make it work. Let's look at what Robert Platzcraft Jr., who is a PhD in political science, said in 2009 about boost-phase missile defense and what the missile looks like during boost. He said, quote, boost-phase missile defense has another inherent advantage. The missile is relatively slow-moving, not having yet achieved full acceleration. At this time, it emits bright exhaust gases that are relatively easy for sensors to detect and track. Essentially what this is saying is that the missile is extremely bright during the boost because of the fumes coming out of it, so it's very easy to track in that scenario. So if the interceptor did have to do its own discrimination because of jammers, that would be easy to do in the boost phase of the light. The reason that the jammers point actually applies in mid-course is because given it's in space and it's not boosting anymore, there's no light because there's not firing of fumes around the missile, so the interceptor having to do its own discrimination isn't able to effectively do that because there's not a fume. That problem is different in the boost phase. Now let's move down To their argument about loss of control, this disadvantage, I have several responses. My first response is specifically in response, talking about the National Research Council report. We're going to look at a quote from David Wright, PhD in physics, who is referencing the opinion of Richard Garwin, also a PhD in physics, in October of last year, saying, quote, "The National Research Council report has garnered a lot of criticism, much of it at a technical level. Richard Garwin has weighed in with criticisms of the report in several key areas. He questions the report's assertions about blue space defense, noting that the report conflicts with several other technical studies on blue space defense, but that does not explain why his conclusions differ." End quote. Essentially what this is saying is that from these experts, these PhD quoting another PhD, basically what they're saying there is that the report actually ignores other studies that have been done on blue space defense that have found it to be effective. The NRC report doesn't take that into account. We're going to respond to this argument anyways, even though the whole basically founding evidence of the argument isn't true. The next response is early warning. We actually have early warning satellites that will be able to tell us when we need to get ready to fire a blue space interceptor at the ICBM. So that means that we'll be able to plan that and it won't just be a sudden thing that we're surprised by. George Lewis and Postal again, not George Lewis and Postal, George Lewis and Theodore Postal said in 2010, once again, quote, "The system would not have to operate continuously as satellites would be used to determine when an ICBM is being prepared." End quote. Essentially what that's saying is that an ICBM, you can't just launch it immediately. It takes several days to prepare, and our satellites will be able to detect that. So that means that our drones will be ready at the time when we know it's going to be launched. It's not going to be random when we're scrambling to try and shoot the interceptor and shooting wherever we can. It's going to be planned and calculated. This is not going to be a random decision. My second response is that the interceptor can be fired at the same time. This once again from Theodore Postal in 2009, quote, "The interceptor can be launched essentially when the ICBM is launched. The reason that the United States has developed seat-to-the-ground sensor for the generation of early warning satellites. The infrared signal from a missile can be detected." End quote. Essentially what this is saying is, once again, because of the early radar, it is possible for us to fire the interceptor at the same time the ICBM is launched because of the early radar, because of the early warning and the infrared signals there. So this is simply not an issue with decision time. Now let's move down to the next disadvantage, which is that of Chinese relations. I'd like to basically have a few responses here. My first response is non-unique. Now, our relationship with China right now in the status quo is already strained because China has they haven't been willing to fully support the United States when it comes to North Korea. So the relationship with China is already strained. And my second response is no capability. The fact is that our planet has little to no capability against China's ICBMs. Mary Kaczynski, MA in International Affairs, said in June of 2012, quote, "A drone-based defense would pose little threat to either Russian or Chinese long-range strategic missiles," end quote. Postal and Lewis, Postal said in 2009, quote, "This system would pose no threat to Russia or China. Their missiles are far too numerous and dispersed," end quote. Essentially, blue-space defense only works against small countries like North Korea. It would not work against a large country like Russia or China because those missiles are far too numerous and dispersed. So basically what that means is that there's no way this can have any sort of capability against China, so there's no reason they would have to fear it. It's specifically targeted at North Korea. My third response is China condemns. The fact is that China, there's no reason for them to prefer that North Korea would be able to fire a nuclear weapon at the United States. That doesn't make any sense. China's economy would be devastated in that situation. The only possible impact of this disadvantage could be that China gets a little upset with the United States. Okay, that pales in comparison to the impact of a nuclear weapon landing in the United States. This basically wins on all four of the impact calculus. We win on magnitude because it's a nuclear weapon, reversibility because human life is irreversible, timeline, well maybe not timeline, but that doesn't really matter. And then the final one is probability. This is very probable North Korea will shoot a nuclear weapon in the United States, and we can stop so asking for the emergency fund. Thank you. Any questions from the speaker?
We just got a couple of questions for you.
All right.
Number one, would you agree that North Korea currently has theater range of ballistic missiles?
I'm not entirely sure. What we're looking at is the intercontinental ballistic missile start plan.
Right, but North Korea currently does have short range missiles.
I believe they do have some short-range missiles, but I'm not entirely sure about that capability.
All right.
Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. So, can I take a look at that very first card you read? Actually, sorry, the third card you read about the code under the inherency.
The code?
Yeah, you said there was a simple code, basically.
Cone.
Oh, cone, sorry. Sorry.
This one.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So is this actually, is this specific to countermeasures? Or is this just talking about...
It's saying that the X-band radar can be denied seeing which is countermeasures and which is the warhead by simply putting metal cones over the warhead.
Okay,
So that's simply what it's saying. That it would deny the X-band radar the ability to effectively destroy it.
Okay, so quickly, I know this is kind of a big jump, but moving all the way down to the disadvantage about the loss of control.
Yeah.
Now, we talked about an early warning radar that basically is used by our satellites, and basically we're able to basically try to respond to the DA. But what early warning radar was this?
What it's saying is that we have satellites that are able to detect when an ICBM is being prepared. Given you can't just launch an ICBM, it has to be built on the launch site and it has to be prepared. We have satellites that can detect that, so we'll be prepared when the ICBM is actually launched.
Okay, what type of early warning radar was this?
I don't know the specific name of the radar. Basically, what the evidence was saying is that we have satellites, we have reconnaissance aircraft. We'll be able to know when North Korea is preparing an ICBM. The country can't just prepare an ICBM against the United States without anybody knowing about it.
Okay. So moving on to the solvency about the threat being too imminent.
All right.
So can I quickly see your card? About 18 months to build a management system.
Sure.
All right. So this is not specific to the type of drone you're going to end up using or the type of interceptor you're going to be using.
We don't specify the specific drone interceptor. We leave that up to the Department of Defense. But the fact is that the drones exist, the interceptors exist. All they really have to do is put them together.
Okay.
There's no reason that would take 3 years to figure out how to put them together.
Okay, but this is specific to the Predator and actually the Global Hawks.
Is that a question or something?
Would you agree that this is specific to the Predator and Global Hawks?
I'm not entirely sure, but honestly, the drone itself doesn't actually matter because all the drone really does is carry the interceptor. The drone doesn't have to perform any huge mission or anything, it just has to carry the interceptor around the area.
Right, but the drone has to be able to carry the interceptor in order for your plane to work, right?
Of course, if you can test that the weight of the interceptor is too much or something, I definitely have specific responses to that.
Alright, great. So I think I just have some those are my questions. So I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thanks.
You guys want it?
I think so, yeah.
What?
Sorry.
Not only must we look at the policy that the firm proposes, but we must also look if this policy has a good chance of working. And more importantly, what are the risks of passing this policy? With that in mind, we'll be looking at some solvency points first, talking about how first the policy doesn't achieve the goals it wants to, and secondly, we're looking at a disadvantage about the risk of massive amount of life loss. So let's go ahead and start at the top of the solvency point. Since my partner ran 2 solvency points in his speech, we can label this as solvency point number 3. So we made solvency point number 3 that of drone operator shortage. Drone operator shortage. Now, basically, the main premise of this argument is currently the Air Force does not have enough drone operators training in order to fully put more drones over North Korea. This is from TR Defense, dated on April 2010. Quote, the U.S. Army and Air Force are both faced with a shortage of UAV operators. The shortage is more accurate for sensor operators. The Army and Air Force are putting electronic monitoring equipment on their UAVs to pick up radio or phone traffic. More sensor operators are essential if this multiplicity of sensors is to work remote. It basically says that there's already a deficit of drone operators, and the affirmative team doesn't mandate more under their policy. Therefore, we don't know if there will be enough to fully implement the plan. With that in mind, let's move on to the next solvency point. This is solvency point number 4. That's of no possible interceptors. No possible interceptors. Now, cross-examination asked Megan what type of interceptors were there actually, and she wasn't quite sure. The fact is that there's 2 types of interceptors, and they wouldn't work to put on a drone against North Korea, because either the interceptor arc is too big or it's too slow. This is from the National Academy of Sciences. They reported this on summer of 2012. They said, quote, a notional 6 km per second interceptor appears to be too large to be carried on a tactical aircraft. It is evident that a normal 4.5 km per second interceptor has no viable boost phase capability against a non-national solid ICBM. Unless it overflies North Korean airspace, and that even a normal 6.0 kilometer per second interceptor, when sea-based, has little room to maneuver, and then only for limited, if a limited zoned threat launches. Unquote. This is a complicated piece of evidence, so we try to explain it this way. Basically, there's two kinds of interceptors that you can put on a drone. The 6-kilometer one, which is too large to be put on a drone, or there's the 4.5 kilometer per second one, which in order for that one to work, you have to put it over North Korean airspace. Now, the permission does not mandate that you put this over North Korean airspace, as that would be an infringement of their sovereignty, and that would have a whole different disadvantage to it. So that in mind, let's move on now to the next solvency point. Solvency point number 5. You can label this as timeline. Now, basically, I'm going to be extending my partner's argument, making it into new solvency. The fact is that we don't know how long it's going to take to get all of these components to work in one place. Since there's no even current interceptor available to put on a drone with all that technology combined, their timeline evidence needs to take into account how all the technologies need to be combined. So we need to see warranted evidence on how long it's going to take, because they need to put all they need available. They need to first determine the best available technology, and they need to work with testing with putting those two things together. Now let's move on to the next solvency point. Their wrong location. Wrong location. I believe this is solvency point number 6. It must be close in proximity to the launch site in order for the boost phase interceptor to work. This is from the Missile Defense Agency. They stated this on June 27, 2012. Quote, the boost phase is the most difficult phase in which to engage a missile. The intercept window is only from 1 to 5 minutes. It says, goes on to say, missile defense interceptors and sensors must be in close proximity to the missile launch. Unquote. Another piece of evidence to back this up is from the National Academy of Sciences in 2012. They said that the only possible locations are not politically acceptable, meaning that the only possible locations for the boost phase to work is if it was over North Korea, which again, the permission does not mandate that you put this over North Korea. This is again from the National Academy of Sciences. They said, quote, the Department of Defense should not invest any more money or resources in systems for boost phase missile defense. Boost phase missile defense is not practical or cost effective under real world conditions for the foreseeable future. All boost phase intercept systems suffer from severe reach versus time available constraints. Thus, it is true for kinetic kill interceptors launching from surface from airborne platforms or from space. While there may be special cases of a small country such as North Korea launching relatively slow-burning liquid-propellant ICBMs, in which some boost phase interceptors are possible, it goes on to say, the required basing locations for interceptors are not likely to be politically acceptable. What this tells us is that in order for it to work, it needs to be so close to the launch site, basically hovering over North Korea's airspace, and they do not mandate that. We then also move on to the next solvency point, that of smoke screens. Smoke screens. I believe this is 7. Basic premise, like Roman stated in his last speech, is that the reason you can detect the boost phase so well is because of the big plume that it creates. Now the problem here is that because of the big smoke screen that it creates, it also hinders the visibility of the interceptor to correctly intercept the abort. This is seen from Global Security on July 21st, 2011. They say, quote, a study on boost phase defense commissioned by the MDA identified several challenges. A boost phase seeker has a seemingly simple task of homing over a very hot, bright ballistic missile during the boost phase. However, a ballistic missile signature compromises both the missile's body itself and a large rocket plume at high altitudes. The plume blooms around the missile, in effect, creating a smoke screen of hot exhaust gas that, depending on the kill vehicle's angle of approach, can obscure the body of the rocket. A kill vehicle must be able to detect and hit the missiles within the plume. Here we see basically because of the way boost phase is launched, because of the big smoke screen, an interceptor can't really detect the warhead well because of the limited visibility. That was one of the solvency point number, the next one. I believe that's 8. Solvency point number 8 or 7 is short-range missiles. Basically, this is talking about how the system of boost phase cannot solve short-range missiles. This is from George Lewis, PhD, experimental physics, and Postal said in 2011. Quote, this proposed missile defense system would not address threats from shorter range ballistic missiles. The use of highly robust, specialized defense against much shorter range and relatively mobile missiles with short range